events. Keep in mind the library closed on October 13th. And then the concert that was supposed to be on the 16th is postponed, unfortunately. But the following week, we have some great events. We have the Art of Bonsai on October 19th at 11 a.m. Come and learn about bonsai trees, how they are made, how to maintain them, how to start your own bonsai garden. And then on the 20th of October, Books and Bites, Like Mother, reviewed by Janine West, our director. And then on the Tuesday of that week, the 21st, we have Montreal Intercultural Storytelling Festival presents The Girl and the Dog and Other Shape-Shifting Tales with Jan Blake. That's at 2 o'clock right here in the auditorium, Tuesday the 21st. And then the 26th, we have a concert, a tribute to Oliver Jones on Sunday the 26th at 2 o'clock. Tickets will be made available on the 17th of October, starting with members, and then the following week for non-members. You can pick them up at the circulation desk. And now here, without further ado, is Dr. Joe Schwartz with Science Demystified.
Thank you. You know, we are in a war, but not the one that you're thinking of. We're in a war with pseudoscience. We're in a war with nonsense, because there never has been any era in our history where there has been so much misinformation that was thrown at people. In fact, as far as science goes now, we are swimming in a sea of misinformation, and we're drowning. It's very difficult, challenging to overcome all of the nonsense that is being said out there. Let's start with prime example. Happened about 10 days ago. And of course, it's all about Tylenol, which was introduced in 1953. And it is, believe it or not, the most widely sold drug in the world. There are more tablets of Tylenol or acetaminophen sold in the world than anything else. But of course, the reason that it made the news was because the Orange Demon came out with this rather incredible statement. Tylenol, this is word for word, Tylenol can be associated with a very increased risk of autism, very increased risk. Note the grammar. So taking Tylenol is not good. I'll say it, it's not good. All right. There's, so many issues to attack here, beside the inability to just speak. First of all, the word association is always problematic. We see it all the time. There's a big difference between association and a cause and effect relationship. Let me give you some examples here, because, this is one of the most important concepts in science that you have to get across, that association or correlation is not the same as a cause and effect relationship. So let me give you an example here. When you have hot, sunny weather, people have more ice cream, right? That's a cause. When you get hot, you want more ice cream. That's a cause relationship. Also, in the summer, when the weather is hot, more people are swimming, and therefore there are more cases of drowning. That is also causative. However, the relationship between licking an ice cream cone and drowning, okay, that's an association. Consuming ice cream is not going to make you drown. So that is an association. However, I can give you some even much more interesting ones. How about the association between the per capita cheese consumption and the number of people who die by becoming tangled in their bed sheets? Look at that relationship, right? That is a very strong association. More frozen yogurt consumption and violent crime rates. Pretty interesting. I mean, it's hard to imagine that there would be a causative link between eating yogurt and committing crime. Or butter consumption correlates with wind power generated in the United States. That's interesting. Well, there's several interesting things here. One is the increase in butter consumption. That's pretty noteworthy, right? In spite of everything we know about consuming saturated fat, butter consumption has gone up. So pretty strong correlation. I mean, obviously, it is not causative. When you put up windmills, it is not going to make people eat more butter. And one last one. The number of times successfully Mount Everest is climbed correlates with the number of hot dogs consumed at the July 4th Nathan's hot dog eating competition in New York. Yeah, obvious, right? So, but you know what is even more fascinating than these correlations is that somebody actually found these. You know, imagine having to just pour through all kinds of statistical information to notice that this is okay. So association is not cause and effect relationship. There is an association between women using Tylenol during their pregnancy and the risk of giving birth to an autistic child. It's an association. It's a very, very weak association, but it is an association that has been noted in a number of studies. However, there, of course, are alternative explanations for why there should be such an association, other than that Tylenol causes autism. For example, people who have headaches, who have fevers during pregnancy, are more likely to take acetaminophen. And they are also more likely to give birth to autistic children. That's been well demonstrated. Autism is a genetic condition, certainly at least partially. And autism is a spectrum. It's not that you're either autistic or not. There are many, many degrees. There are many, many highly functioning autistic people, you know, who have some problems, like, you know, they may have some compulsive behavior or OCD, but perfectly functional and bright, and, you know, so it's a whole spectrum of autism. But what is also known is that anyone who is on the autistic spectrum, pregnant woman, is more likely to give birth to children who have autistic symptoms because it is a genetic condition. It is also well known that people who are on the autistic spectrum pay more attention to fevers and pain, etc. They're more sensitive to these things. So they're more likely to take Tylenol. So it's not that Tylenol is causing it. So there's an association. Of course, you cannot rule out that it's possible that acetaminophen is causally involved. That would be a very difficult thing to do, because you can't do a proper study. You can't take pregnant women and give some of them acetaminophen and some not and see what happens. Ethically, you cannot do that. So this is really an association, but of course the implication by Trump and Kennedy was that this is known to be causative, and that, as he said, women during pregnancy should not take Tylenol. Well, there's another issue here. You know that he always referred to Tylenol over and over again, whereas he should have been referring to acetaminophen. The only trouble is he can't pronounce it, right? So that's why he was saying Tylenol. Now, this is disingenuous, to say the least. Why? Because there are hundreds of products on the market that contain acetaminophen besides Tylenol. In fact, there are 600 over-the-counter painkillers in North America that have acetaminophen, because of course the patent on it has worn off long ago, so anyone can produce it. So to single out Tylenol was ridiculous, and I think that the manufacturer of Tylenol has a very good case here for libel. So I'm sure they're working on it. But I think they do have a good case. But he said in that press conference 25 times, I know because I counted, don't take Tylenol. That's what he said. And sometimes he veered away from pregnancy. He even said, don't give your children Tylenol if they had a vaccine, which is, of course, ridiculous. So the overall message was that pregnant women should not take a Tylenol. Now, that is a very dangerous message, because fever and pain during pregnancy is a real risk factor to the fetus. And that's not theory. That is well known. That's established fact, that women who have high temperature during pregnancy, that can result in all kinds of deformities or even miscarriage. High fever during pregnancy has to be treated. Acetaminophen is the best treatment for that, because you cannot use the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. You can't use ibuprofen, Advil. You can't use that in pregnancy, because that has a known risk. So you just wonder how many Republican women out there who think that Trump is the Messiah are going to follow this advice and not take medication when they have a high fever during pregnancy, and just try to grin and bear it, which he actually said. He said that if you have fever and pain, well, it's not such a big deal, just grin and bear it. No, that is terrible advice. And obviously, why should anyone be taking medical advice from Trump? I mean, just think how ridiculous that is. Here's a man who is scientifically illiterate, verbally illiterate, has no rational thought process, and yet he is advising women about what drug they should take during pregnancy. And his partner, Kennedy, is comparably illiterate. He has no science background whatsoever and just says one dumb thing after another. Now, interestingly enough, there are people who immediately jumped on this and tried to benefit from that press conference. And one of them was Shane Ellison. This is a guy who calls himself the people's chemist. And I've had run-ins with him, at least, you know, in lectures, because this guy advocates a chemical-free lifestyle. He actually has an undergrad degree in chemistry. He worked as a pharmaceutical chemist. Anyone who has worked in chemistry and talks about a chemical-free lifestyle, this is total nutty. Everything in the world is made of chemicals. I mean, if you want a chemical-free lifestyle, you got to live in a vacuum, right? It's absolute nonsense. But he now has capitalized on this fear that Trump and Kennedy created about acetaminophen or Tylenol, because now he is marketing an alternative to the acetaminophen. And this is his Relief FX. Okay? Now, let's take a look at some of the claims that are made here. 4 times stronger. Then what? What does that mean, 4 times stronger? Right? Works in 16 minutes. Yes? Not 15 or 17, 16 minutes. 100% plant-based. Well, yeah, so it's 100% plant-based. So is strychnine, right? So are castor seeds, which contain ricin, the most potent toxin that we know. And so is atropine, which comes from the belladonna plant. So just because it's 100% plant-based means nothing, should not give you confidence. So what is really in here? What is in this wonder product, this Relief FX? All right, here are the ingredient. Salix alba, 25%. What that means, again, is up in the air. I mean, 25% of what? And the other one is just ginger. That's the technical name for ginger. The 4:1 is just a meaningless term. What does that mean? 4-to-1 ratio of what? So this is essentially nonsense. But let's take a look at what this Salix alba is, which is the supposed active ingredient. It's an extract of the white willow tree. Now, the white willow tree does contain a compound called salicin. And salicin potentially has pain-relieving and fever-reducing properties, which I'll explain. But now, let's talk about why, in this context, this is total nonsense. All right. So this business of the bark of the white willow tree. Yes, there's some historical evidence of it being used. If we go back to the 1st century AD, and Democritus, who was a philosopher, did write about the benefits of pain relief with willow bark extract, and so did Pliny the Elder. So that was documented. But of course, they had no idea why. They didn't know anything about, what the ingredients were. But the first time that there was a recommendation to specifically take willow bark extract for pain and fever, other than these sort of obtuse references in the Roman literature, was in 1770 around. And that was with this account written by British, I would even hesitate to say scientist. He wasn't really a scientist. He was a Reverend Edmund Stone, who one day tasted the bark of the willow tree because he was experimenting with plant remedies. Why taste the bark? Because there already was extensive knowledge that the bark of a tree, the cinchona tree that grew in Peru, was effective in relieving fever. Today we know why. It contains quinine, and quinine was effective against malaria. So it was not such an unusual thing for people to try to taste barks of trees. So he did that, and he wrote this paper, submitted to the Royal Society, where he explained that the bark of the willow tree would relieve the ague. That was an ancient English word for pain. And because of this, there's actually a plaque in Oxfordshire dedicated to Edward Stone, discovered the active ingredient in aspirin was living near here. Actually, that is not true. He did not discover the active ingredient in aspirin. The only thing he discovered was that chewing on the bark of the willow tree had pain and fever reducing effect. That's the only thing that he discovered. Now, why is that? Because there is a compound, salicin, as I told you, in the willow. When you ingest that in the body, this is what happens, and it gets converted to salicylic acid. That is the pain-relieving substance. However, it is also a substance that causes irritation of the stomach, and it can cause stomach bleeds, which is the reason that aspirin was developed. In the late 1800s, Felix Hoffmann, working at the Bayer company, had a father who had terrible arthritis. for which at that time the drug was salicylic acid. But then you have the problem of stomach irritation. So Hoffman tried to modify the molecule to convert it into a similar molecule, hoping to retain the therapeutic effect and eliminate the side effect. That's how aspirin was created, by putting an acetyl group onto salicylic acid. So you had acetylsalicylic acid, or ASA. Edward Stone did not discover that. The only thing he had discovered was that chewing on the willow bark had some pain-killing effect. Okay. So anyway, what this guy, the people's chemist, is recommending as an alternative to acetaminophen is the extract of the willow tree. But salicylates are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. These are in the same family as ibuprofen, which is absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy. And there are warnings all over the place about the use in pregnancy of NSAIDs. You cannot do that. That is a real risk to the fetus. So salicylates do not trump acetaminophen during pregnancy. This is absolute malpractice to suggest to take willow bark extract instead of acetaminophen. So you can see how, the misinformation that Trump and Kennedy started out with now even cascades into more dangerous areas, because this guy jumps on the bandwagon and all of a sudden, people are being told to take the dangerous salicylates during pregnancy. But I mean, this guy is really a piece of work, because when you look at his website, Straight Talk, he dares call it, stop trying to lower your cholesterol, as if this is a bad thing, according to him. Now, there are a lot of these people these days, these sort of influencers, who are contrarians. Anything that is mainstream, they will contradict, because that is what gets attention. Telling people that, high cholesterol is linked to heart disease and you should lower it, that's old hat. People not going to pay attention to that. But if all of a sudden you claim that that's a bad idea, you should stop lowering your cholesterol, that's going to get attention. He also tells us that you can have a life without blood pressure medications, statins, and blood thinners, that these are all bad drugs. And, this is a guy who's got a bachelor's degree in biology and a degree in organic chemistry, who's spouting this kind of nonsense because it does get attention. Then he'll also tell you that vitamins are a curse. You should not be taking them, because, again, that gets attention. And curiously, he tells you all these things that you should not take. But on his website, he sells a large array of dietary supplements. So that's Shane Ellison, this guy. The only surprising thing is that Kennedy, the ultimate snake oil salesman, has not wanted to hire him to be one of his lead researchers, because Kennedy, of course, is hiring all kinds of nuts to be in with NIH. It's a tragic situation. All right, well, let's get to something that perhaps is a bit more entertaining, but still meaningful. We're going to talk about zebras and horses. One of the mottos that first-year medical students are taught in virtually every medical school, and you see this in textbooks, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. It's a very interesting sort of statement, which was first voiced by an American physician, Theodore Woodward. What does it really mean? It means that you should think of common things before you think of more complex explanations. For example, if you present to the doctor with a stomach ache, all right, The first thing that you should think of is indigestion before you think that it could be stomach cancer, okay? Because it's much more likely to be indigestion. This is what is meant by the zebra-horse analogy, right? Because horses are much more common than zebras, so that if you hear hoof steps, it's much more likely to be a horse than a zebra. However, that doesn't mean that zebras don't exist, right? So, of course, stomach cancer is real. It can happen, and it can present with indigestion as a symptom. But when you have indigestion as a symptom, it's much more likely to really be just indigestion and not stomach cancer. So it's very important to first rule out common things before you start thinking about more serious conditions. So that's the interesting relationship, between medical science and zebras. But there are other interesting things about zebras. They really are a curious animal, right? With the pajamas that they wear. And the question that we ask is why? Why the stripes, right? I mean, evolution is not random, right? Things happen for a purpose. So how did the zebra evolve to look like that? There are several theories that have been put forward. One is to confuse predators. A predator doesn't know what to make of this creature, that looks so strange. They also suggest that it has something to do with keeping the temperature constant, although I think that there's not much evidence for that. And recognition of potential mates, because there are a lot of animals that have sort of that kind of shape, right? And if you see the stripes, you know that it's one of your species. But the more interesting thing, which has evidence, is that zebras are less likely to be attacked by flies and other insects. That it is the particular striped pattern that somehow wards off insects. Now, of course, you want something more than just a theory here. You want there to be some evidence. And Dr. Tim Carroll, who's a highly recognized biologist, as you can see, he has some fun with zebras, which is one of his areas of research. And he has written an extensive book on zebras and their stripes. And in it, he documents evidence about flies and other insects, that they are less likely to attack zebras. So that's pretty interesting. And this came to the attention of some cattle breeders in Japan. And they wondered if they could somehow make use of this rather interesting observation. Why? Because cattle, of course, do attract flies, insects, etc. And this presents a real risk to the cattle ranchers, because it can make the animals sick. It stresses the animals. You don't want them to be attacked by insects or flies. And there are many different kinds of flies that will attack animals. I mean, if you've ever been to a farm, I mean, you go into the barn and you see that it's just buzzing with all kinds of insects. And it's not just an annoying situation for the cattle. It is a real problematic one, because it increases their stress hormones, and that in turn results in less milk production, which of course affects the farmer, affects the marketplace. So what do they do mostly on cattle farms? They try to combat the situation by using pesticides. And there are more pesticides used in animal care, believe it or not, than there are in agriculture. So it's a very significant problem. So they use permethrin, which is a synthetic compound based on what is found in chrysanthemums, which have natural pesticide qualities, or diazinon, which is also very, very potent pesticide. And they also use ivermectin, which is very effective as warding off insects. And that is the same ivermectin that you may have heard of during COVID-19, when the clown show in Washington also suggested that this was a treatment for COVID-19, which is total nonsense. Anyway, so the ranchers in Japan read about the zebra stripe theory, and they wondered if they could apply this to their cows. So what do? You paint the cow. So this is exactly what they did. They painted the cow with paint that's supposedly safe and that doesn't stay on for very long. But they did this experiment quite properly. So some of the cows were painted to be striped like zebras. Some were painted just with black stripes, and the control animals were not painted at all. And then, of course, they wanted to monitor what happens. So one of the things that they monitored was the activity of cows that they engage in to combat flies, such as stomping around or shaking their head or flicking the tail. And if you've ever watched a cow, you'll see that they're flicking the tail all the time to get rid of the insects. What were the results? Very interesting. These are the control cows, the black and white striped ones, and just the black. And what we have here is the frequency with which they engage in behavior to try to get rid of the insects. And you can see that the black and white striped cows engaged less often in behavior to ward off insects. Then they also counted the number of insects that land on the animals. And there, once again, you see that fewer insects landed on the black and white cows than on the black striped cows or the control cows. And they actually counted this. They took a film of the cows and they monitored, and they actually were able to count the flies. You can see the flies there, and they counted this over a period of time, which is, you know, how we saw the graph there, and shows that it works. And the paper that presented all of this data ended with this. This work provides an alternative to the use of conventional pesticides for mitigating biting fly attacks on livestock that improves animal welfare and human health, in addition to helping resolve the problem of pesticide resistance in the environment. Well, yeah, not exactly. Well, this is an interesting study. Is it really practical? Are farmers going to go out and get paint and paint their cows zebra colored? No. And neither do I think that the cows are going to appreciate being a living canvas. And they might have an issue with the farmer trying to do this. But nevertheless, I mean, it's, you know, it's an interesting idea because who before would have thought about why zebras have stripes? And there might actually be a reason for this. All right, let's leave the cows alone and get to something about humans. And I'm going to approach the topic of lithium. And if you remember your high school chemistry, lithium is the lightest metal. It's in group 1 of the periodic table. And if you would see pure lithium, it's a bright, lustery, shiny metal, which reacts very readily with water. If you take a piece of lithium and you just throw it into water, it will start scooting around and put out a lot of heat, turning the water into steam, which is what you see coming off, and it also will liberate some hydrogen. Now, when I mention lithium, I would think that there are a couple of things that will come to your mind. One of them is lithium batteries. You hear about that. And the other is lithium used as medication for bipolar disease. So those are the common uses that people are familiar with when it comes to lithium. But now we have a rather interesting and a novel possibility, and that is the possible connection between lithium and Alzheimer's disease. And obviously, this gets a lot of attention when you have a headline like that, because, of course, we are increasingly worried about Alzheimer's disease because it is happening with greater frequency. Of course, the reason it's happening with greater frequency is because Alzheimer's is an age-related disease. And as the average age of the population increases, as people are living longer, which they are, there's a greater risk of Alzheimer's disease. So a headline like that, of course, gets your attention. It's a little bit misleading. Here's a better headline about the story I'm going to tell you, because at least here they will tell you that the experiments were done on mice. But very often that kind of gets lost, you know, when the media get hold of a science story. And because mice doesn't make for as alluring headline as implying that there's a human connection. Anyway, lithium occurs in nature not as a pure metal. It is found in various minerals like petalite, from where it can be extracted. Lithium compounds are in there. And it was first identified as an element by Arfvedson way back in the early 1800s. And, you know, as is so often the case, when some novel substance is identified, the scammers immediately jump on that. And they did that back in the 1800s just as they do it today. So all of a sudden, when lithium was identified as being present naturally in the environment, including in some water, all of a sudden, a health-giving water, because it contains lithium, invaluable remedy for gout, rheumatism, sciatica, and lumbago. Then they even came up with lithium pills that you would put into the water to boost the amount of lithium. One of the most famous ones was buffalo lithia water. This was very popular in the 1800s with all kinds of claims. Look at all the things that buffalo lithia water could do. It solves the problem of rheumatism. It's good for the kidneys and all of this stuff, none of which was, you know, scientifically based. I mean, this was in the era of patent medicines when you could just say anything that you wanted. Believe it or not, the original Coca-Cola, which was a tonic long before it became a soft drink, was also made with water that contained lithium, because that was also a public relations gimmick at that time. But the one that really championed that idea was 7-Up. The original name of 7-Up was lithiated lemon soda. Again, implying that the presence of lithium made this beneficial. And there were many others that jumped on this. There was lithiated beer, various kind of beverages. And look at the claims. Removes uric acid from the system. Uric acid buildup causes gout, right? So, of course, that was very appealing, because gout was pretty widespread disease at that time when people had terrible diets. So they would drink this lithiated water, of course, not with any kind of result. But where there was a real downside to this was when information started to emerge about sodium being involved in raising blood pressure and salt or sodium chloride being, a criminal and people being told to stay away from sodium chloride, then all of a sudden, the scammers said, all right, let's replace it with lithium chloride. That turned out to be a very bad decision because lithium chloride is toxic to the kidneys. So that resulted in some fatalities. But again, this was in the late 1800s. So it's not surprising that when Dr. John Cade first suggested that there was real therapeutic benefit to taking lithium, that people looked at that as a skew because they had heard about the lithium chloride travesty and the kidney disease that it caused. But Cade was right in terms of lithium in the form of lithium carbonate being a very effective treatment for bipolar disease. All right, but now we get to the story that's been going around recently about the connection between lithium and Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, of course, terrible disease. It basically robs you of your personality. It starts off with memory problems. Your memory is being erased, etc. We do know the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. And what happens is that in the brain, there's a buildup of what are known as these amyloid plaques, deposits in the brain, and they interfere with the transmission of signals from one nerve cell to the next. Anyway, I mean, it's pretty well known what happens in the brain. Now, there are other things that we know in terms of the connection between the brain and lithium. A study just a couple of years ago found that patients who were being treated with lithium for their bipolar disease had a reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. That's an interesting observation, but of course, it's just an association, doesn't prove cause and effect relationship. But then there was also a study that showed that people who drink water that naturally is high in lithium, because of course there are all kinds of minerals in the water you drink because the water has flown through the earth and has dissolved some of these minerals, that they had a reduced incidence of dementia. So in areas where there is a higher amount of lithium naturally occurring in the tap water, there is a reduced risk of various kinds of diseases, including dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's pretty interesting. Now we get to the study that generated these headlines. Now, it's very interesting. It started out with mice, where a Harvard researcher noticed that high concentration of lithium dampened signs of Alzheimer's disease in mice. So that is what got them interested. And what they then did was they looked at lithium levels in the brains of people. Of course, the only time you can do that is once they have died. Then you can take out the brain and examine it, which is what they did. And what they found was that in one particular area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is where you have memory and decision making, that there was a reduced level of lithium. That's interesting. And not only did they find that, but they also found that in these amyloid plaques, which are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease, there was an increased amount of lithium. So what it seemed like was that the amount of lithium that's normally present in the brain, which of course gets there from the food that we eat and the water that we drink, that it was being sucked into the amyloid plaques, leaving a low amount in the rest of the brain. So this was very suggestive that if you could somehow increase lithium in that part of the brain, it might be a possible treatment for Alzheimer's. Well, the first thing you want to do is see if you can boost lithium in mice and see what that does. So the first thing that they did was they took a group of mice and they put them on a diet which contained almost no lithium. So they were robbed of lithium in their brain. And then they supplemented with lithium. And what they found, that after about 8 months, the ones that were given the extra lithium had better maze solving ability. And, you know, solving mazes is an occupational criterion for mice. I mean, that's how you determine, you know, their levels of activity, their level of brain power, etc. So that was interesting. So we have a situation here where they showed that low levels of lithium in the brain are associated with poor mental performance. And then when you increase it, you improve the memory, at least in mice. So the question is a low level of lithium in the brain, is that predisposing to Alzheimer's? And of course, whether or not taking a lithium supplement can ward off the disease, right? I mean, these are interesting avenues to explore based on the information that I just mentioned. Well, the researchers actually did try to do that with the mice. And they chose to supplement with lithium orotate, which is a compound of lithium, because this version is very difficult to be absorbed by those amyloid plaques. So this actually does increase the amount of lithium in the rest of the brain. And what did they find? Is that after these animals were treated with the lithium orotate, their memory improved. Pretty interesting. But there's a huge but here. And that but is that mice are not people. All right? So you have to before you do anything, I mean, you have to do the clinical trials on humans. So the question is, if people take lithium orotate like the mice did, are you going to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease? At this point, nobody knows, because this is where the research stands, and no one has yet done clinical trials with this. But it's available. You can buy it in health food stores. You can buy it on the internet because it's a naturally occurring substance. And therefore, the laws, the pharmaceutical laws, don't apply to it. You know, and as far as natural product goes, I think I talked about this last time. The regulations are almost non-existent. If you can show that something occurs in nature, you can't sell it. So you can buy lithium orotate, but there are no human clinical trials yet. So I think at this point, it's too early to jump on the bandwagon. I'm not saying that this is not possible, but as a general rule, when you get preliminary research like this on mice or rats or whatever, the chance that it eventually becomes useful for humans is a very small chance. There are many, many substances that have beneficial effects in animals that never turn out to be useful when you do the human clinical trials. But nevertheless, of course, there are companies that are already promoting lithium water, just like they did in the 1800s, except now the graphics are better. But again, the evidence isn't there. But there are bottled waters that do contain naturally a high amount of lithium. Pellegrino, this Italian water, is one of those. So at this point, I think it would be unsound to be making any kind of recommendations about increasing lithium intake. But there is, this preliminary evidence, which is enough to tickle the fancy of researchers, And eventually we hope to do some clinical trials, and maybe there is something there. I wouldn't bet on it because, as I said, we just have too many historical examples where substances looked extremely good in animal studies and then never turned out to be useful in humans. Human is a more complicated system than animals, more complicated brain. Human brain is much more complicated than the brain of a mouse. Of course, not always. It's, you know, I gave you a couple of examples before where the mouse brain is probably superior. All right, so what I want, one more story that I want to tell you about, which is an interesting story that has been in the media and maybe in your stomachs, and that is Dubai chocolate. Yes. Not in the doses that you would buy in the health food store, or no, there's no danger. Dubai chocolate, how many of you have heard this story or have even tasted it? All right, it is a tasty story. And so let me just delve into this. And it is, the story actually makes me kind of jealous. Why? Because I do regularly videos, as you may know. Maybe some of you subscribe to them. If not, you should. They're like 3 or 4 minute interesting little videos, and you know they're on our YouTube channel, and you see at the top where you can get them. And the reason I say that I'm jealous because, you know, I get when I get 1,000 or 1,200 views for each one, I'm happy. Well, I'm not really happy, but that's what I get. Whereas Maria Vehera, who started the whole Dubai chocolate story, she got 1.25 million views for eating chocolate in her car. This is how it all started. But the chocolate that she was eating was the one that had this interesting name, can't get enough of it. It's kind of clever. Well, this chocolate actually wasn't even truly chocolate. It had certainly a chocolate coating, but inside was this mixture of pistachio and kind of noodles. The company that manufactured it was in Dubai, in the Emirates, and the company was called Fix, for freaking incredible experience, supposedly by biting into this this chocolate, and it was invented by Sarah Hamouda, who actually was an engineer. She had an engineering degree, but as a sideline, she started playing around with pistachios. And pistachios are interesting, not especially if you look at their agriculture. There's a pistachio orchard in California, which is where we get most of the pistachios, although by far the world's greatest production is what country? Iran. Yeah. Produces the most pistachios. That's what they look like when they're growing, and this is how they're harvested. This machine shakes the tree, then the pistachios fall down, and there's a conveyor belt there. They're collected, and then the seed, which is what we eat, is isolated. So anyway, that ground up was part of this paste inside of the Dubai chocolate, mixed together with knafe. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this sweet concoction. It's a traditional Arab dessert, and it's made with this spun pastry dough, and it's mixed with cheese and soaked in sugar. Anybody make this? You make it? Yeah. Like you make the cake kind of thing? Yeah. So anyway, this chocolate, they can't get enough of it, became extremely popular. It just took off. So that people started to try to duplicate it. But they couldn't call it the same because that name was trademarked. So they started producing what they called Dubai chocolates. And I guess, you know, it probably is not that hard to do because you can buy the dough. You can buy the pistachio paste, or I guess you can grind the pistachios. You can mix it with some tahini. So people were making it at home. But because the original bar was so popular and people couldn't get enough of it, other companies jumped on. And all of a sudden, there were all kinds of Dubai chocolates being produced under various names, but just using Dubai chocolate as the term, and they were all selling out. It was really quite amazing. There was this run on these chocolates, and the major manufacturers got into it. Lindt, all of a sudden, came out, as you can see, with Dubai-style chocolate. So they can't say that it was the same as the original. This is Dubai style. But when they came out, it was amazing. People stood in line around the block to buy the damn chocolate. Okay? And they were also selling it online. There it is. $20 for a bar of chocolate. You can also buy the original version online. There it is. $120 will get you six of them, slightly different flavor. But there's something else that is interesting about the original version. Each bar is unique in terms of the artistry on it, because each one is sprayed, you know, with some colored syrup so that each bar really looks different. Anyway, they were happily rolling along, taking in all this money, until we heard this business about pistachios being contaminated with salmonella. And all of a sudden, the Dubai chocolates were being recalled. Some people ended up in hospital. There were all kinds of reports about not only the chocolates, but pistachios themselves being recalled because they were contaminated with salmonella. Salmonella infection is not pleasant. You know, I mean, it comes with all of these symptoms, but it usually goes away after a couple of days. To this day, don't really know what the cause was. But, you know, animals, of course, poop in the fields, and the pistachios, when they're gathered, you can, you know, pick up some poop. So, I mean, that happens on farms. So don't know. It's contamination is widespread, and it's hard to know exactly where it came from. So there were a lot of the Dubai chocolates that were recalled and the pistachios recalled, but the original version was not. So that was unaffected. It was only pistachios that were grown in California that were affected, not the ones that come from Iran. But now, of course, they're very careful. It's all tested, and but the popularity is still there. You can go to Costco, and you can now buy the Dubai chocolates. And as you can see, they're careful to point out made in Europe, with, you know, so that you shouldn't confuse them with the pistachios that had been recalled. So anyway, I suspect that this chocolate story, which, you know, has risen, will also dissipate, and it will become just a little fragment of history. But for now, it had a huge economic impact, and also it alerted people to this whole problem of salmonella poisoning. All right. Well, that's it. Those are some of the things that are happening around us in the world of science. And as you can see, it's always interesting. That's the neat thing about science is no matter where you look, you're going to find something that's interesting. Okay. The yeah, pistachio ice cream. I don't know of any pistachio ice cream that was recalled. So yeah. So you can eat your pistachio ice cream. Yeah. Yes. No, there were specific ones. I mean, I think there were about four different kinds of the yeah. I tell you, interestingly, last month in August, uh, we took my whole family on a trip to Hungary. They wanted to see their roots, and it happened to be our flight was the day that the strike started, that Air Canada strike started. So anyway, so we had to be rerouted through Dubai of all places. So we're put on Emirates, fantastic airline, I must say. So we had to fly 13 hours to Dubai and fly back 6 hours to Europe. Uh, and the tragedy was that I was sitting in the middle of the airplane, so I couldn't even see out the window. So I've been to Dubai and never even saw Dubai. But at least I thought that I would be able to buy the real original Dubai chocolate at the Dubai airport. No, they only had the copies for some exorbitant price. So it didn't turn out to be the experience that I thought that maybe there was a silver lining in that cloud. I'd get to try the real Dubai chocolate, but didn't happen. Yeah. How much? $21? Yeah. I mean, I mean, of course, I've tasted the copy versions. They're good, but yeah. I mean, why it should cause all this commotion, Hmm? This is the one you saw for $21? Wow. But it's in pieces, right? It's small, little cups, yeah. And it was good? Okay, I'll have to try it. All right, so we'll see you next month.